Okay guys, let's talk arms. What you're looking at here is a cylinder or a very bad arm, right? As we look into the arms and legs, it becomes very much about how the outside and the inside lines relate to each other. That is to say, how we find and accentuate and have control over our gesture and over our rhythms. Now that, as always, is always set up by the bones, and when we're looking at the bones of the arms and legs, we're talking long bones, right? The definition of a long bone is that it's kind of long and it's generally thinner in the middle through here and flares out at the ends, so it has a broader articular surface to articulate with the next bone along. Now the reason why that's important in a series like this, where we're just trying to strip everything down to just the bare essence, is that if I'm saying this is a humerus, which is what it's ultimately going to be, is that I only care about the humerus here and here, because that's where it's impacting the surface form. Humerus actually kind of rare for a long bone. It doesn't even have a bony landmark up there. So the only place where it really manifests itself on the surface, the only place where it's a true bony landmark, is down here. We have two bony landmarks down here, medial and lateral epicondyles, which we're going to look at in a bit once we've got the main body of the bone. Now, another quality of long bones is that they generally have a nice S-curve to them. From the front view on the humerus, it's not so obvious. So this is going to be a left humerus, by the way. So we would curve in here and we would curve out there. There'd be a little bit of that S-curve. Now from the side view, we'd really start to get a feeling for this, and you can see the humerus curling in from the side through there. And then we'd come forwards a bit. So this would give you a rough indication of what the humerus is doing from the side. But even this level, you really don't need to know. Right now, there are some things that are useful and interesting to know. So if I just push this a little bit further so we can get some idea of some semblance of a bone through here. So for example, we would have this groove down here, and this is what's called the Precipitant Groove, and that's because part of the biceps comes up through that groove and then turns to grab hold of the scapula here. The other part skips that. So it gives you some information about the biceps, right? But if you're at the point where you're worrying about that, then you're at the point where you don't need to be watching this series for starters, right? Because that's at a point where like you've got everything already in. So there is a level at which you should be thinking about this, because it might help your studies, it might push it further. So through here, for example, if I find this little notch through there, that is where my deltoid grabs hold of. It doesn't affect the shape, just nothing that I'm going to ever notice in life, but it maybe helps me remember, okay, the deltoid is grabbing pretty far down the humerus, so then I need to internalize that. But for the purposes of what we're looking at in this series, what I'm interested in is going, okay, well, this bone is flaring out here, and there it has this kind of semicircle that's articulating with the glenoid cavity of the scapula, and then down here it flares out, and this is where we're going to start looking at this in a little bit more depth. So let's break this down through here into three shapes, and then think about why we're breaking it down into those three shapes. So on the inside, this is the medial epicondyle, right? An epicondyle being a bump on a condyle, and a condyle being an articular surface. So this is the medial, the one in the middle, epicondyle, the bump on the articular surface that is on the middle side. Through here, this sometimes teaches a banana shape, something like that. That's the lateral epicondyle. Doesn't stick out quite so far. So these are both bumps, right? And when we get onto the muscles of the arm, we're going to see why these are super important. Neither of them are articular surfaces, but we do need to understand the articular surfaces that we're dealing with here. So through here, if I do something like that, I'm making basically like a spool shape, right? Like you might use in sewing, and then above and below that spool shape, I'm carving in a triangular shape through here. This is going to be for the ulna, which we will look at separately, but for now, just something like this will do. So this itself is not a bony landmark. This does not manifest itself on the surface. What it is, and ignore just how weird all of this looks, I'll fix that later. What this is a hinge. right, for the ulna to hinge around. So this is the point of articulation that the ulna has. But we have two bones in the forearm, right? We have the radius and we have the ulna, and this is the hinge for the ulna. The radius is not even a little bit concerned with that. The radius out here has its own point of articulation. That's this sphere through there, and that's called the capitulum. This is really just a more or less a half sphere, something like that. So if you find your box, your spool shape, your sphere, and from the side view, your banana shape, then you're hitting everything that matters in this end of the ulna. Up here, if you're finding this sticking out forwards and that sticking out through the back there, you're hitting everything that matters in the humerus. And from this point on, any changes that I'm doing are either details that are not necessarily important for what we need to know, or it's just refining what I've already got and starting to look to push the rhythms and the shapes. And that's fine. You can do that all day long if you want, and it's going to make it feel nicer, it's going to make it feel bony, it's going to do a whole bunch of things. What it's not going to do is have any impact on the surface form at all. So for that reason, I'm not so interested in it, and so let's just call this